legit. Ah, 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 ah. Anything you want. Ah, 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 ah.
Bix is the owner of Road to Ruta. That is roadtoruta.com. You can also find him on his YouTube channel, which is Road to Ruta. And I am very happy to have Bix back on the X22 Report Spotlight. Bix, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Hey, Dave, it's nice to be here.
Hey, thanks for being here. Let's just start off with the economy. And I think there's a good place to start. And I mean, we're getting a lot of mixed messages right now. Trump is out there. He's tweeting out that the economy is doing great. We have GDP numbers increasing. We have the stock market, which is at all-time highs. Yes, it's been bobbed up and down. It's a little chaotic lately. Unemployment number is very, very low. And on the other hand, we have the mainstream media out there, and they're saying, oh, recession's coming 2019, 2020, which coincides with the elections, which is very coincidental. And, you know, we have two different stories. Now, I remember when Obama was president, we were saying that the economy is heading into a recession. You know, it's one gigantic illusion. Now it seems like it flip-flopped, and now the mainstream media is out there saying it's recession. I don't remember the last time the mainstream media ever said, like, oh, a recession's coming, prepare yourself. Have you?
No, it was an illusion back then, and it's an illusion now. I mean, the amount of market rigging, the amount of phoning up inflation numbers, GDP numbers. I mean, there's nothing you can count on to support any kind of economic evidence in any direction, because, I mean, Trump took over a system that was rigged and has continued to rig. And it's one of those things. It's like, you know, why did we go to business school to learn, you know, how the economy works if we find out that everything is a lie? It's really interesting time.
Do you think he's using the same manipulation that Obama and other presidents have used, even the central bank? You think he's using it to convince everyone that the economy is doing very well, so this way he can blame it on the Fed?
That's part of it. I mean, it's one of those things, when you take over a rigged economy with rigged numbers, there's no way to get back to where it should be without continuing the rig. So yes, Trump, he hired Steve Mnuchin as the head of the Treasury. Steve Mnuchin was the computer IT expert at Goldman Sachs, in charge of market rigging for Goldman Sachs. So, I mean, as soon as he named Steve Mnuchin, I'm like, well, that guy's the head of market rigging at probably one of the biggest market riggers on planet Earth. So he's going to call his buddies, say, hey, kick in the computer algorithms on this day. You'll make this amount of money, and you'll also help me tell the world that the stock market is great. And, you know, the whole while it's computer programs, click the mouse, and all of a sudden you can drive the stock market up, you know, 10%, 5%. There is no limit to the amount of manipulation in any market, including gold, silver, cryptos, oil, gas, the bonds. Everything is rigged now.
So let me ask you this. Before Trump became president, he was out there saying, you know, we have bubbles, the stock market is manipulated, and he was out there talking down the economy. Why didn't he just come in and say, listen, this whole thing's fake. The stock market manipulated. All you need to do is push a couple of buttons. You can make them go up and down. The statistical numbers, completely manipulated. This is not a real economy. The whole thing has been manipulated. Why didn't he just come in and say that right from the very start?
I think there was a couple reasons. The main reason is the chaos. The chaos that would be created when, and he didn't want to get blamed for it. And also there was a lot of the old regime, the bad guys as I call them, entrenched in government, in the banking system, and they're still there. But they're starting to be weeded out. It's going to take a process. I mean, these guys have put themselves in a position of power for the last 100 years, and Trump can't come in and expect them to go away. I mean, even the judicial system, half the judges are rigged for the bad guys as well. So it's one of those things. It's been very difficult for him, obviously, to take over the reins and try to get try to drain the swamp without destroying everything. Although I believe ultimately at the end they're going to have to destroy the monetary system completely, because there's no way to rejigger the system when the bad guys own 99% of the wealth, and they've hidden it away in fake accounts and real accounts tax dodges in Antigua and in British Virgin Islands and all around the world. So he's had a Herculean task of getting rid of these people so that we can hopefully one day close up the Fed and move forward with sound money, which would be great for humanity, but it's such a change that you can't do it overnight.
So you mentioned destroying the economy that we're in today. Actually, it's the central bank economy. And on the Chan boards, there was a question and answer time with Q. And one of the Annans asked a question, will gold bring down, will the Fed be destroyed? And Q answered, gold will bring down the Fed. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about gold. Does the United States have gold? I know you've done a lot of research with gold. First, do you think we have gold? Second, how is gold going to bring down the Fed?
I would say absolutely. We have massive amounts of gold, more gold than anybody knows about. But the reality of the gold in the like Fort Knox gold or West Point gold, that's probably been lent out and rehypothecated 10 times in different various forms all around the world. It's going to get to, if the system crashes, it's what you have in your hands or in the ground. And the United States, as a policy, has been for the last 100 years, taking the natural resources we have in the ground and locking them up in the national parks, wildlife preserves. The largest oil find on the history of planet Earth was up at Gull Island in Alaska in the 1960s. And what they do, they locked it up instantly, knowing that as long as people take this fiat money, this unbacked fiat money that they can print easily with a click of a mouse now, as long as people accept that as money, we'd rather use that to buy other people's natural resources and keep our natural resources in the ground. And we've had just major, like humongous gold finds within the United States. The largest one I talk about is within the Grand Canyon. And I believe that was the reason for the creation of the Federal Reserve. And I found it on the front page of the New York Times back in 1912, right before the creation of the Fed. They announced that they found billions and billions of ounces of gold within the Grand Canyon. And then Woodrow Wilson locked it up. And there's no exploration allowed to go in there. You can't bring a pebble out of the Grand Canyon. And it's completely locked up. And I believe, and this goes along with many other stories, like gold at Chocolate Mountain Gunnery Range in California. Dianne Feinstein and her Desert Wildlife Preserve has blocked off millions of acres of some of the richest gold country in the world, all with the idea that we're going to use everybody else's assets first, including gold. And then one day we're going to need it. We know we're going to need it. And then at that day, we'll have it in the ground and we can mine it. And it was also in the Road to Ruta comics that I found at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. That's what they're saying, basically, is that there's gold in the ground and we will have to go back and use it at some point in time.
So you're saying that from the beginning, all these national parks in these certain areas, they purposely put this aside, knowing that there's deposits of gold or maybe other type of metals or maybe oil or anything else. They did this on purpose, not to save the parks because of their beauty and things like that, but because of what was underneath the parks.
For the most part, yes. I mean, if you go to the Grand Canyon, it's the most beautiful place in the world, and I've spent some time there. But I get why they blocked it off. But also, I mean, what we're talking about is not the 190,000 tons that's supposed to ever be mined on planet Earth. That's a lie created by Harry Oppenheimer at Goldfield Minerals Services back in the 60s. The truth of the matter is that there are millions of tons of gold that are available in the ground and above ground. And all you got to do is look at the research of Sterling and Peggy Seagrave, Yamashita's gold. And they did extensive, lifetime's worth of work and all the documentation showing that there's at least 300,000 tons that is involved with that situation. But even though they've proven it time and time again, nobody, the mainstream, the Jeffrey Christians of the world will tell you, oh, no, 190,000 tons, that's it. So I think the gold people will be shocked to find out that there's millions of tons of gold. But on the same front, they've been rigging the gold price. The gold price should be way higher in relation to fiat money. And that's the other thing they lie about is the amount of fiat money they've created. When you're in charge of the statistics on creating fiat money, you can print more than $21 trillion in debt and not tell anybody. And Catherine Austin Fitts has done some great work in exposing that. And she says, well, it's more like 21 trillion plus another 30 trillion plus what? There is no limitation on what the government can do on that front, and then don't have to tell anybody. And that's the key to fiat money is it's a fake system. So use it to your best ability. And then when it's all done, when the benefits have pretty much gone away and all of a sudden you're losing your economic freedom, then destroy the system and start fresh. So that's kind of where we are now.
The second part to this is, how will gold bring down the Fed? What makes gold the power to bring down the Fed?
Well, I think that more has to do with some of the shenanigans that the Fed has done. Although there's a lot of gold out there, it's not necessarily in the hands of the Fed. And the Fed has given all this gold to hold in safekeeping for other central banks around the world. And I don't think, truthfully, the Fed has any idea just how much trouble they're in as far as the gold situation. Because you can't make gold out of thin air. Yes, there's millions of tons of gold, but it's not necessarily in control of the Federal Reserve System. It might be under the control of the U.S. government, but as we know, the Fed is not a part of the U.S. government.
So do you think Powell, since Trump is out there continually contradicting the Fed, do you think Powell is working with Trump, or do you think the Fed is trying to bring down the entire economy to go along with the deep state agenda?
No, I think the Fed is working with the Treasury and working with what I call the good guys ultimately. But there's bad guys in there too. It's one of these things. If you read the Fed Road to Ruta documents, it is clear that there's a power above the Fed that is controlling things. And that is what Trump is fighting. There are people within the Fed fighting it, the people within the U.S. Treasury fighting it. Steve Mnuchin, I would say, is working closer with the bad guys to keep the system up and going. Although ultimately, at the end of the day, both sides want to crash the system. The bad guys want to crash the system to get rid of all their dirty deeds, and the good guys want to crash the system to get rid of the bad guys. So the crash is coming. We just don't know what day and how destructive it would be, because, for example, Deutsche Bank with $55 trillion in derivatives, you can't bail your way out of that. And I think that was set up by Greenspan in the late 90s when the Bankers Trust merger with Deutsche Bank happened. There was a lot of bad deeds in that Bankers Trust merger, and it just got worse at Deutsche Bank, and that's how they covered up with derivatives. And as we've seen, their stock prices drop like 51% this year, and it will go to zero, and that will literally throw a monkey wrench into the derivative market.
Now, when you say there's a power above the people in the central bank, what do you mean by there's a power above them?
Well, remember, the central bank, you got your board of governors, and then you got a few thousand people that work for the Central Bank of the United States. Well, there's central banks all over the world. And who puts the people in place? Is it the bankers or is it the president? I would say it is the president listens to his advisors. The presidents are not real keen on understanding how central banking work, especially from the dark side of central banking, the secret money printing that they don't tell anybody about and all that. So if you're looking at who were those people, it would be the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Warburgs. And, if you go down the history of the Fed, G. Edward Griffith's book, Creature from Jekyll Island, is a great history. The only thing that he missed in that book was the reason that Woodrow Wilson approved the Fed. It wasn't because he wanted to give the bankers, or he was conned by the bankers. He was very much anti-banker. The reason he did it was they found all this gold in the Grand Canyon. It would have destroyed the monetary system, and social chaos would have hit back in 1913. And we've been delaying it ever since. So there are people behind the scenes, and see, that's part of the problem now. They own a lot of the gold too. So will we go to a gold standard if the old system crashes? I don't know. If the majority of gold is owned by the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, that might not be what we want to do. And there wasn't an alternative until cryptocurrencies came around. And if that right now the battle in the cryptocurrencies is the bad guys who control our system now are trying to get their hooks into the cryptocurrencies by introducing a huge derivative complex into it. And not sure if it's going to work, but they're doing a great job at rigging the markets in cryptos. So it is a crazy scene, and I think the only way to get out of it and move forward would be a total destruction of the derivative complex, which would take out all the bad assets and leave the real assets, the non-debt based assets. But we'll see what happens.
Now, if the system does come down, I mean, we don't know the exact time it's going to come down. I mean, how is Trump, his administration, the good guys, going to protect the people from when this happens? And also, isn't this going to hurt his chances of, getting elected? I mean, what's going to happen to his administration if this whole thing starts to fall apart?
Well, if it falls apart, there'll be no government. If the banks go down and the derivative bubble blows, Trump won't worry about, getting elected. We won't have a government. There'll be no money. And the reality of something like that is what they're planning for. We put off this transition for over 100 years, and it should have happened before the Fed was created, but it didn't. And now we're in a problem of massive debt. For every dollar of debt, it's someone else's asset. And most of these debt-based assets are in like pension funds and at the banks on the banker level. So, yeah, I mean, you shouldn't underestimate the collapse of the derivative system. It would freeze every bank, every financial institution. We would need martial law. All these things are being put in place for the transition out of the old system and into something new. And a lot of people are going to go to jail. And I know we talk about it years and years. We've been talking about the bankers going to jail. It seems like 2008 is a great example. No banker went to jail for literally stealing billions and trillions of dollars from people and then having the system implode, and they get bailed out. So they get, when they are successful, they get all the gains. And when they fail, the people have to bail them out. The system's broken, and we need a fix.
Now, you talk about people going to jail, and in the past we talked about indictments. We talked about the investigation into the Clintons, investigations into Comey, investigations into Strzok, Page, and pretty much the whole gang. And, we've been talking about this for a very long time. And just recently we had this whole hearing about the Clinton Foundation, which people started to talk about the Clinton Foundation and how it really wasn't a charity, and they were exposing certain things within the Clinton Foundation. Do you think this is just the beginning to get everyone talking about the Clintons, the Clinton Foundation, so we can move forward on this?
Well, I think the beginning was the release of the Podesta emails.
Yes.
Which kind of brought that stuff to light. It's just ongoing and continuing. And do I think that ultimately people will find out the truth? I hope so. I think Trump always holds that card in his hand that he can release all the Anthony Weiner laptop files, which are supposed to be the most horrific things humanity has ever seen. But it really is. It's the attempt to make this transition without destroying the fabric of our country and the world, both culturally, religiously, economically. It does touch every facet of this fake world we've been living in, and the exposure in the media and what they're doing to us, and even to the point of extraterrestrial beings out there. All this stuff that's been hidden from humanity, and the fact that we've had free energy for over 100 years, and yet it's been hidden from us. That could free up so much for our planet, for the people, for our economic system. But at the same time, it would put half the global population out of work with these huge changes. Like, imagine a world with no banking system and no fossil fuel system and economy and things running off free energy, and the whole world will change. So these changes that are being withheld from us are just massive. And we can look at the system we have and say, oh my God, it's so horrible. And the future could be so bright, but the transition is going to be very, very chaotic.
Is that what he's worried about with releasing, like, the declassification of FISA, all the emails from Weir's laptop, everything the Clintons have done, and everything else? Are they worried about chaos when all of this comes out? Is that their biggest worry?
Yeah. Well, obviously, yeah. I mean, that's always been the biggest worry since the creation of the Fed is the social implications of what society would do if they knew the truth. And, the FISA thing is tiny and all that stuff is tiny. To your average Joe, to them, it's the biggest thing in the world. Oh my God. But in the bigger scope of thing, it's all trying to manage a smooth transition, and it will come out, the FISA stuff, and there will be people sentenced to death for treason, I believe. And it will shake up our system. But we need a shakeup. We can't be afraid of this transition, or it's going to go on for another 100 years and things will get worse and worse and worse. So I think a lot of truth and reconciliation has to happen over the next few years. And the good guys, as I call them, are trying to slowly ease us out of the old system and into a new system. Bravo. If they can do it, that'd be amazing. But I don't think it can be done. I think at some point you just got to pull the plug, pull the Band-Aid and say, all right, here's the truth. And you're going to have to be grown up enough to handle the truth. And then, because that's the only way we can move forward.
But if they do that, a lot of people would lose, what they have in the bank, their investments, because if we just go ahead and say, okay, let's get rid of this system and everyone has to basically handle the truth, we're getting rid of the central bank system, because we've been in this central bank system. It's a fake system. They control it. They control everything. And if we just scrap it, everything that we have, everything that we own, all our investments are tied into the central bank system. So everyone would have to start from zero. Right?
Well, that's the thing. It's an illusion of wealth and assets that the vast majority of people have. Stocks, bonds, CDs, checking, savings. It's all an illusion of wealth. And behind the scenes, they're rehypothecating every single asset. You look at the DTCC, who's supposed to keep track of all the trades of stocks, and they even admit 300 million shares are not settled every single day. So there's, for every Apple stock owned out there, 5 people own the exact same share. So it's just an illusion of wealth that they have. If you have a real, tangible, non-debt based asset in your possession, like gold, like silver, I would say coins, because Federal Reserve notes are based on the Federal Reserve. But coins of change should do a lot better than a lot of these assets that you think, oh, I have $1 million in my Fidelity account. You don't have it. It's an illusion of wealth. And the minute that the derivative bubble goes off, that illusion goes away. And that's the key. And like I said, everything is going to change when the truth is told. If the truth is told, all the assets that are being rehypothecated in the exchanges, the crypto community just went through something called proof of keys, where everybody's taking their cryptocurrencies out of the exchanges and the online wallets and bringing it into their own possession, because they wanted to prove that they control their own destiny. And you're not contingent upon Coinbase staying in business or JP Morgan staying in business. And I think France is doing that on Friday. They're pulling their money out of the bank, say, we don't believe in these bankers. We don't think they have the assets that they tell us. We don't believe in the illusion of wealth. I think that'll be a huge thing moving forward. The illusion of wealth versus the actual possession of wealth.
Wait, you said something about France. Is this the Yellow Vests protests?
Yep.
They're going to be pulling their money out of the banking system?
The head of the Yellow Vest movement just got arrested for doing this, but they are planning to pull their money out of the banks. Now, I don't think the French are very conservative. They're going to leave, the vast majority are going to leave their money in. But you're going to see ATMs shut down and things like that, which makes people start thinking, okay, does a bank have the money? No, we all know the banks don't have the money. Just watch It's a Wonderful Life and you'll get the concept of they lend the money out. but they don't lend the money out anymore. They use it to gamble. And you're having huge banking problems all over the world right now, and secret bailouts going on. So it's happening. You just got to get your assets in your own possession. And if you own gold and silver, if you're not the one who holds it, and you're not the only one who holds it, then you are going to lose it, because nobody, no institution, no vault, nobody can survive the collapse of the derivative bubble.
Since Q is telling us that gold is going to bring down the Fed, you're telling us there's gold out there. Q is also telling us that there's going to be a structure change of the Federal Reserve. And it looks like we're moving towards a complete destruction of the central bank system. I mean, we know China, Russia, and many other countries, they're accumulating or repatriating their gold. What is gold's real value then?
Well, that gets back to the original Road to Ruta documents, where like this is one of the documents from the Road to Ruta. This Road to Ruta comes from the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. One of the documents is called Banking Basics. And in that, it's a pamphlet. In the pamphlet, it shows this little girl walking up to a bank with gold coins and exchanging them for dollars. It also has the GATA painting in there that, with sunlight. The Gold Antitrust Action Committee has this portrait of kind of the GATA people charging the Federal Reserve with a flag. It's all cloaked in darkness. In the Fed comic, it has the same thing, except the Fed is in light and the doors cracked open, meaning the Fed is ready to change over, get rid of the old system, get rid of the bad guys, and probably be incorporated within the U.S. Treasury and do what is right, which is create a version of sound money. But the first thing you need to do is get rid of all the old stuff. And that's why Alan Greenspan allowed the derivative bubble to get so big. Alan Greenspan, Robert Rubin, and Larry Summers back in the 90s fought tooth and nail to have the derivative market unregulated, to give the banks enough rope to hang themselves. And just look at what they did with the derivative market. Hundreds of quadrillions of dollars of derivatives have been written, knowing all well the whole time they knew that if there was a third-party disaster like Deutsche Bank goes down, it wipes out everything. All those phony assets, all the illusions of wealth will be gone, and you're basically left with what is real: gold, cryptocurrencies, silver, and whatever the United States decides to use as money going forward. I would guess that the U.S. will use some kind of physical gold exchange dollar, where you, as a bank depositor, can go into a bank and say, okay, I don't trust you. I have $20. I want $20 worth of gold back. And you'll get that. So it's a redeemable standard, because people are not going to trust derivatives after this thing goes down again.
Do you think the Federal Reserve will exist when this happens? I mean,
as part of the Treasury, yeah. They'll get absorbed into the Treasury. A lot of people have been talking about that for years. Why? We all know the Fed is political. The whole concept of the Fed being separate from the government was that it wouldn't be political, and everybody knows it's political. And if you control the money supply, if you control the money, you control politics, you control everything. So I think it will be absorbed into the U.S. Treasury.
Will this be a Rothschild controlled?
No.
Okay, so they're
no.
Out of the. What about the rest of the world then? What happens to the Rothschild's banks? I mean, these banks are in like every single country. I mean, it's the ECB, it's the IMF,
well, remember,
it's the BIS.
There'll be no ECB, there'll be no banks, there'll be nothing after the derivative bubble goes. This was all part of the way they designed to destroy the Rothschild banking industry. If you got money, you can't have the United States implode and everybody go on their merry way. The United States is the last world reserve currency, fiat world reserve currency. China's not going to take. China wouldn't even want to. There's huge responsibilities for having a world reserve currency. So the concept that the Rothschilds will have what they have physically. They'll have the gold that they have in their estates, although they'll probably be exposed, and probably a lot of countries will nationalize whatever their assets are, because there'll be a lot of blame going around. Who did this? How did we get in this position? Who did what that was illegal? And then because remember, the NSA has all communications from everybody. So it's not that anything's being hidden right now. Everybody knew the system was corrupt. The problem was the corrupt leaders were still in power, and now they're not, and they're being systematically removed. So we have all the dirt on anybody, and even the Rothschilds will be taken out and probably nationalized if it's found that they are just as criminal as we think they are.
Do you think that's what Q means by a structure change?
Yeah, well, a structure change for the U.S. would be the crash in the banking system, and then a reboot, a reallocation of money within the United States, which Congress has the power to do. I do think it will be some kind of a gold-backed system or a crypto-backed system, although nations need more flexibility than the real crypto blockchain type of thing with limited amount of coins. So it will probably be some kind of gold-backed U.S. dollar. Trade will stop around the world, obviously, with the crash of the banking system, and then every country will have to fend for themselves. And that's kind of what was said in the Road to Ruta documents from the Fed, because they talked a lot about, when will this country start trading again with this country, and will the national government take over the mining of these scarce assets? And it's really interesting, the document, especially the teacher's guide to the Road to Ruta from the Fed. It really talks about some of the, how do they reallocate assets to the population. Alan Greenspan's plan was to do it by Social Security balances, which you don't think are a lot today because there's just so much money out there. But if the banks crash, there's not any money out there. And then Social Security balances would be probably the fairest way to reallocate, at least start the reallocation process of money within the United States, because it pays people who have bought into the system for the longest and worked the hardest would get the most, and then it would trickle down. But everybody, that's why they talk about a base income level, because if the system gets destroyed and all these industries go away because we have free energy and things like that, and the healthcare industry isn't trying to kill us anymore, we will need something for people to survive off, and that's where Bernie gets his basic income type of concept. So there's a lot of different ways to reallocate money, but the Fed also says in the teacher's guide, it says, what if the people don't accept these solutions? And that's a really interesting thought, because no one's going to have faith in the government. No one's going to have faith in the Federal Reserve. Who are the people who are going to make these decisions? These are the type of things that when you think about all of it, you really think, oh my God, we got to kick the can down the road. And that's what we've been doing for 120 years. And that's got to stop.
You said something very interesting, that the people will not accept, because for the longest time, we've been taught that, debt is good. The more debt you have, putting, your purchases on the credit cards and things like that, that's good. The debt of the countries, that's fantastic. And we're all going to have to be taught something completely different than what we know today. Because think about it. We have the Forex, we have the derivatives, we have the stock market, we have the bond market. I mean, all these things were created by the central bank system. This is all part of their system. So everything is going to change.
Yeah. But we won't need to be taught it. We're going to experience the problem with it. It's not something that, we got to be taught to do this. We're going to experience the destruction of it all. We're going to experience how painful it is to work your whole life and lose everything because you had your assets held with a third party. That's a life experience that they've been putting off for a long, long time. And it is the reason that we are in this mess, is that we keep putting it off. But in retrospect, it's going to be obvious. It's one of those things like, when companies fail, you can always look back and say, oh yeah, I knew I shouldn't have put my money in Bernie Madoff because they're promising, 7-8% return where everybody else was getting, 3 or 4% return. Things like that. In retrospect, it looked obvious, but it isn't until you experience that you learn a lesson. And that's why countries like, Argentina and Zimbabwe have learned their lessons the hard way, and we're going to have to learn our lesson the hard way. But it's such a fast teaching lesson. You can learn it right away. When your banks collapse and you lose everything, you have learned your lesson, and it will never leave you for generations.
Once this happens and people start to realize that this whole system crashed, I mean, this is what I'm thinking. Trump has been contradicting the Fed. Won't the world look at the central bank and say, never again? We can't be in this system ever again because look what happened to it?
Well, absolutely. And it's not necessarily the central bank. It's fiat money. Central banks are part of it, but
Right.
Central banks don't create all the money. The vast majority of unbacked fiat money is created at the banking level. They lend money into existence. And then they were given the free rein to create derivatives, which are a form of money. And that's what they use to rig the markets, make, hyper returns on massive leverage. So yeah, these are lessons that, once they are learned the hard way, we won't repeat them for generations. So when this old system falls, it's so massively corrupt and rehypothecated and leveraged to the hilt. We are now, today, I was reading an article, we have never in the history of mankind seen more debt that has been created every single day, and every single day it grows. So we are going to learn a lesson that will be very valuable and will be passed on for literally probably centuries about what is real, what is illusionary wealth, and how corruption has taken over our system. And that's why we're not going to trust the banks. We're not going to trust the government. We're not going to trust anybody, really. That's why cryptocurrencies are so great, is all you have to do is trust in math. And if you trust in math, you don't have to trust people. It's decentralized. And that's the beauty of that invention. And I love it. I do think gold will be part of our monetary system as well, but not as big a part as the cryptocurrencies. And I don't think silver will be part of our monetary system because I think it'll be too valuable in industrial uses in a high-tech world. And there's just not enough silver out there. I mean, there's maybe 6 billion ounces of silver on planet Earth, and there's 6 billion ounces of gold, and yet the gold to silver ratio is 82, 83 to 1. I mean, when you think about it, what's going to happen when the rigging complex of the COMEX and the LBMA goes away and silver and gold are able to be traded freely, one for one? You have to have the gold to make a trade, and you have to have the silver. I think silver to gold ratio will probably change to at least 4 to 1, probably 1 to 1. 1 ounce of silver will be worth the same as 1 ounce of gold in a freely traded true market where there are no derivatives.
Bix, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
I do a lot on YouTube these days. Go to Road to Ruta YouTube channel, or go to roadtoruta.com, and there's a free email service on the top left that I send out emails almost daily.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for being on the Spotlight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave.